reading from Matthew, chapter 13, verses 31 through 32. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it has grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nest in its branches.
Several years ago, a severe windstorm swept across the Front Range and took down a giant ash tree in our backyard. Having moved from Southern California, where the notorious Santa Ana winds are known for their destruction, Lori and I had lived through our share of fierce windstorms. But this windstorm, with gusts over 100 miles an hour, was next level. Through the window, we watched our 30-year-old ash tree, nearly 50 feet tall, take punch after punch from the stubborn gusts, leaning ever more slightly to one side with each blow, only to recover and straighten like a dazed boxer trying to regain his balance. Over and again, the tree would steel itself against the next gust while tilting a little more each time, nearly losing its balance completely. And as the wind beat on the tree, the grass line below it would swell and rise like a bubble, and then collapse as the tree righted itself. With every gust, its roots would tug and stretch a little further from the earth, and the mound below would swell even higher, and the tree would gasp and heave as it strained to correct itself. But eventually, the windstorm delivered the knockout punch, and that valiant ash tree finally succumbed to the assault, striking the earth with a sad thud. How rooted are you in these unprecedented times we're living through? As the prevailing winds of social upheaval and division cut a pathway of disruption through our common landscape, how will you survive, and not only survive, but flourish? We are in the eye of the storm. Partisan intransigence, democratic splintering, cultural fragmentation, AI revolution, wealth disparity, climate crises, religious decline, the rise of nihilism. We are at this inflection point in history where old institutions are collapsing and trusted norms are shattering. Established assumptions and truths are contested, and the conventional rules for how the world works are disintegrating. And the speed of change is outpacing our ability to fully grasp its implications. Will this disruption that we're living through, will it take the shape of a new social order, or will it unravel into chaotic rupture? All the uncertainty can leave us feeling disoriented, unsteady, unmoored. How do we stay rooted and anchored amid the chaos? How do we avoid being toppled by the winds of cynicism and grievance and outrage? How do we remain resilient through it all and live as salt and light and leaven in our world? Well, Jesus believed it begins with small, ordinary things. Social turmoil and political upheaval impacted his world as profoundly as it impacts ours today. Living under military occupation, there was no truth but the empire, no God but Caesar, no power but the sword, no kingdom but Rome, and no hope for the Jews beyond complicity, allegiance, and submission. In the face of the empire's daunting political and military apparatus, the Jews felt so small and insignificant. What can I possibly do to change my situation, my world, my future? How can I, as small and powerless as I am, how can I make any difference at all? Many of Jesus' contemporaries believed that by overthrowing the empire, they could restore the kingdom of Israel. They turned to insurrection and violence and revolution, choosing to fight the occupation to reclaim their earthly kingdom. only to sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. Jesus proposed an alternative. Instead of fighting to restore the old and decaying kingdom of Israel, Jesus called people to embrace an entirely different kingdom altogether, what he called the kingdom of heaven. What exactly is the kingdom of heaven? In the Gospels, Jesus never actually defines what the kingdom of heaven is. He never gives us a literal description of the kingdom of heaven. Instead, he uses metaphor to tell us what it's like. Because the kingdom of heaven is really impossible to define. It's like the Indian parable of the blind man, all those blind men who encounter an elephant for the first time. Each are trying to describe it based on the individual parts they happen to feel: a tusk, an ear, a trunk, a leg. One of them says an elephant is hard, another says it's leathery, another says it's rough like a tree. And none of them are wrong, of course. But neither are any of them entirely right. And Jesus knows the kingdom of heaven, like the elephant, is impossible to fully describe. And so he says things like the kingdom of heaven is like a sower that scatters seed in a field, or a hidden treasure buried in a field, or weeds and wheat that grow together in a field, or a drag net cast into the sea, or a merchant searching for fine pearls, or a tiny mustard seed. Notice that in all of these descriptions, the subject of the story, the kingdom of heaven, is not actually a place, but it's more like an experience. For many moderns, the kingdom of heaven is hard to comprehend because we get hung up on these two words, kingdom and heaven. We hear the word kingdom and we envision an actual physical place over which a king rules or governs. And we hear the word heaven and imagine some other worldly place up there or out there or somewhere other than right here on earth. And so we likely assume the kingdom of heaven is some spiritual place we go to after we die and leave this world, where we'll meet a white-bearded Colonel Sanders-looking God who sits on a throne like a king, dispensing judgments and proclamations. Only this is the opposite of what Jesus had in mind when he spoke of the kingdom of heaven. For him, the kingdom was describing not a place, not like a place outside of this world. And the heaven that he spoke of, it didn't refer to a realm outside of this world governed by a monarch like God. How did we ever come up with that kind of image? In 1526, a scholar and linguist named William Tyndale translated the very first Bible into English. And when he came across this phrase in the Greek, basileia ton uranon, he translated it, kingdom of heaven. Tyndale lived in a time when kings ruled, where hierarchical, patriarchal kingdoms dominated every facet of life. When Tyndale translated the Bible, he transposed his kingdom worldview onto this teaching that Jesus gave us about the kingdom of heaven. Like the blind men describing that elephant, Tyndale simply used the only analogies that he was familiar with. But what today we call the kingdom of heaven, it's actually untranslatable, as untranslatable as God's name itself. There is no equivalent for it in Hebrew Scripture. The ancient prophets like Amos came closest when they prophesied about the, quote, day of the Lord, that moment in human history when they said God would set everything right and at peace, and there would be abundance and generosity and dancing, and suffering and hunger and injustice that would be no more. This is sort of what Jesus meant when he spoke about the kingdom of heaven. Not a specific place, but a lived experience, a reality breaking into this world where peace, wholeness, abundance will come upon everyone. Today we might simply call it heaven on earth, when the ineffable beauty and wonder and grace of God touch the ordinary, mundane, and imperfect realities of our world, and everything that's hurting is healed. Everything that's broken is made whole again. Everything that's wrong with the world will be righted. Heaven on earth. Is this not what we all long for? Not to be evacuated from the messiness of life on earth, but to actually see the messiness of life transformed, healed, made whole again. Heaven on earth, the kingdom of heaven. When we pray the Lord's Prayer and we say, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven," that's the point. We're praying for God's highest aims and ideals for creation to be experienced here, now, in this realm, on this earth. We're praying for the peace and grace of God to touch our lives, to flourish right here on earth as it is in heaven. But heaven on earth can seem so impossible and so unattainable. The world's problems are so big. We are so small. Change takes so long. Jesus understood how hard it is to stay rooted in hope, which is why he says that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The smallest of all seeds, he says, that grows into the tallest of trees. It's a good word for us, considering our cultural obsession with all things big and our modern assumption that big is always better. From big box retail stores and mega churches and Powerball jackpots to Hummers and McMansions and banks too big to fail. We live in a go big or go home world. And we forget about the hidden power of tiny things. Things like phytoplankton, the microscopic plant-like organisms that float in the sunlit upper layers of the ocean. Did you know that phytoplankton produce over 50% of Earth's oxygen and absorb 40% of the harmful carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, but that you can't even observe it without a microscope? Is the power of tiny things, like the millions of gut microbes in the human body, invisible to the naked eye, and yet they influence everything from nutrient absorption, vitamin synthesis, to fighting off pathogens and influencing even our mood. Tiny things. Like the 0.1% ingredient in a Coca-Cola. The Coca-Cola that taught the world to sing in perfect harmony. Look at the back of a Diet Coke can. 99.9% of its contents is water. What makes it the real thing is the 0.1%. A Boeing 737 is held together by about 200,000 rivets. If you knew that even one of those rivets was missing, would you still take that flight? The power of tiny things. And pointing to the mustard seed, Jesus says, it's the smallest of all seeds, but it grows into the tallest of trees. Even the birds can nest in it. Sounds brilliant, doesn't it? But you actually don't need a botany degree to know that mustard is not actually a tree. Jesus was right about the mustard seed being the smallest of all seeds, but unfortunately, it will never, ever grow into the tallest of trees because it's not a tree. It's a weed that grows to an average height of about 4 feet. So if you ever see a bird nesting in a mustard weed, it's either dead or about to be. When Jesus says the mustard seed grows into the tallest of trees, I imagine he's laughing out loud. I mean, maybe this was Jesus' idea of first century Mediterranean humor. Hey, did you hear the one about the mighty mustard tree in which the birds build their nests? Maybe this is why Jesus became a rabbi instead of a stand-up comedian. Or maybe Jesus wasn't trying to be funny at all. Maybe he was communicating something here that was far more radical. When he told this parable, 2 things were widely known about the mustard plant. Pliny the Elder, a contemporary of Jesus, wrote an encyclopedic book called Natural History at the time, in which he reported that the mustard plant had 2 distinct qualities. First, it had medicinal value. Mustard was an anti-inflammatory. It was used for treating arthritis, muscle pain, common colds. But Pliny noted a second quality about the mustard plant. He said that, like a weed, once you plant a mustard seed, you, quote, cannot get the place free of it. It grows quickly. It drops its seeds, it spreads, germinates, and grows wild. Once planted, the mustard seed cannot be stopped. And when Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, what he's really giving us is a therapeutic image of healing and a fast-growing weed. He's saying, what I'm planting in the world not only has the remarkable power to heal, but also has the surprising capacity to grow wildly, to spread so quickly that it cannot be stopped. What he's saying is that heaven on earth is like a weed that can drive the rulers of this empire crazy. Try to uproot love, and you'll only make it spread more. Try to squash justice, and it will only resurface elsewhere with even more determination. Squelch the truth with lies, and the truth will only grow louder. Trample goodness, mercy, righteousness, and its seeds carried by the wind will multiply exponentially. You can't contain it or constrain it or destroy it. Heaven on earth is like a mustard seed, the smallest, most underestimated of seeds, that possesses the power to heal the world and the audacity to grow wildly, to flourish, to drive the empire crazy. In a world obsessed with big things, it takes a vision to believe that something as small as a mustard seed can make a difference. There's a word for this kind of vision. The word is perspicacity. Perspicacity, it means a keenness of insight, a clarity of vision that gives us a deeper understanding of reality. Perspicacity, it's the rare ability to discern what's really going on beneath the surface, something that others cannot readily see. And it's what keeps us rooted and grounded in times of tremendous upheaval. This belief that there's a hidden, indiscernible power in the world, which over a long enough timeline has the capacity to change our reality. Jesus says heaven on earth happens when people trust and act on that vision. Plant a seed, and heaven on earth will grow by God's mysterious power. Stocking the shelves at the St. Andrew East Market, making sandwiches for the unhoused and serving them downtown, staying after class to tutor a struggling student, hammering nails at a Habitat for Humanity home, teaching Sunday school or mentoring a confirmation student, furnishing an apartment for a single mom at Joshua Station, You do these things and you are bringing heaven on earth. And it comes because you planted a seed. Perspicacity, it's tenacious. It's wildly mischievous. It's like planting a weed that disturbs the well-manicured gardens of the powers that be. Elie Wiesel survived the concentration camps of Auschwitz and Buchenwald. He went on to teach and write, even to win a Nobel Peace Prize. He had this kind of perspicacity. He got it as a teenager in the camps when he witnessed how the Jewish adults there protected and hid 900 children at Buchenwald. They held illegal classes for the children, and they urged these kids to make plans for their futures, to dream of freedom and justice, to dream of a day when they could live into adulthood, even in the ashes of a camp. They planted seeds. Wiesel was 15 years old when he was liberated in 1945. He later returned in 2009 to speak about his experiences there. He spoke of his hope for a world in which people would stop waging war and people would stop hating one another. He said many of his fellow prisoners had the right to give up on humanity, to give up on the possibility of living one's life with dignity in a world that has no place for dignity. But instead, they chose to reject that possibility. And they said, no, we must continue believing in a future because the world has learned. And Wiesel, he asks the question, will the world ever learn? He says the time must come. It's enough to go to the cemeteries, enough to weep oceans. It's enough. There must come a moment of bringing people together. He was talking about a moment called heaven on earth. It's like a mustard seed, healing the hurting, and wildly daring, unafraid, undeterred, believing that small acts of faith hold this immense power. This is what keeps us rooted in a world of upheaval, trusting that heaven on earth comes quietly and persistently through our small, ordinary efforts, urging us to trust in the hidden potential of what may seem insignificant, yet can grow unstoppable from even the smallest beginnings. Our takeaways for today: heaven on earth is not a distant dream, but a living, growing reality that begins today. Little is big in the kingdom of heaven. And there's a hidden power at work in the world that over a long enough timeline has the capacity to change our reality.